got a horn into him again. "Reckon we ought to shoot," Augustus said. "Hell, this outfit'll run clean back to the Red River if this keeps up." "If you shoot, you might hit the bull," Call said. "Then we'd have to fight the bear ourselves. I ain't sure we can stop him. That's a pretty mad bear." Ocampo came up holding a shotgun, Newt a few steps behind him. Most of the men had been thrown and were watching the battle tensely, clutching their guns. The sounds the two animals made were so frightening that they made the men want to run. Jasper Fant wanted badly to run. He just didn't want to run alone. Now and then he would see the bear's head,
how you
teeth
doing?
bared.
I gotta roll a few up, but I gotta.
Now and then he would see the bull seem to
somewhat separating laundry too at the same time. So I don't think y'all want to watch me do that. So
and in the heat, the blood smell was so
let's
strong
have this going for now.
Then it stopped. Everyone
I'll get on here in a little bit when I take a break.
But the bull wasn't down. Neither was the bear. They broke
apart. If I don't get it done now,
one another in the dust.
I ain't gonna get it
Everyone
done.
prepared to pour bullets into the bear if he should charge their way, but the bear didn't.
Hell yeah! It's always good to get a good nap in.
And the bull answered with a slobbery bellow. The bull turned back toward the herd, then stopped and faced the bear. The bear rose on his hind legs again, still snarling. One side was soaked with blood. To the men, the bear seemed to tower over them, although 50 yards away. In a minute, he dropped back on all fours, roared once more at the bull, and then disappeared into the brush along the creek. "Captain, can we go after him?" Soupy Jones said, clutching his rifle. "Go after him on what?" Augustus asked. "Have you gone daft, Soupy? Do you want to chase a grizzly bear on foot? After what you've seen? You wouldn't even make one good bite for that bear." The bear had crossed the stream and was ambling along lazily across the open plain. Despite Augustus's cautions, as soon as the men could catch their horses, 5 of them, including Dish Bogat, Soupy, Bert, and the Irishman, Needle Nelson, raced after the bear, still visible, though a mile or more away. They began to fire long before they were in range, and the bear loped toward the mountains. An hour later, the men returned, their horses run down, but with no bear trophies. "We hit him, but he was faster than we thought," Soupy explained. "He got in some trees up toward the hills." "We'll get the next one," Bert predicted. "Hell, if he was in the trees, you should have gone in and tapped him with your old pistol butt," Augustus said. "That probably would have tamed him." "Well, the horses wouldn't go in them trees," Soupy explained. "I didn't want to either," Alan O'Brien admitted. "If we had gone in them trees, we might not have come out." The mules had run 3 miles before stopping, but because the plain was fairly smooth, the wagon was undamaged. The same could not be said for Lippy, who had bounced so hard at one point that he had bitten his tongue nearly in 2. The tongue bled for hours, little streams of blood spilling over his long lip. The remuda was eventually rounded up, as well as the cattle. When the Texas bull calmed down enough so that it was possible to approach him, his wounds seemed so extensive that Call at first considered shooting him. He had only one eye, the other having been raked out, and the skin had been ripped off his neck, hung like a blanket over one shoulder. There was a deep gash in his flank and a claw wound running almost the whole length of his back. One horn had been broken off at the skull, as if with a sledgehammer, yet the bull still pawed the earth and bellowed when the cowboys rode too close. "It seems a pity to shoot him," Augustus said. "He fought a draw with a grizzly. Not many critters can say that." "They can't walk to Montana with half his skin hanging off his shoulders," Call pointed out. "Flies will get on that wound and he'll die anyway." Ocampo walked to within 50 feet of the bull, looked at him. "I can sew him up," he said. "He might live. Somebody catch him for me." "Yes, rope him, Dish," Augustus said. "It's your job. You're our top hand." Dish had to do it or be embarrassed by his failure for the rest of the trip. His horse didn't want to go near the bull. He missed 2 throws from nervousness and expected to be killed himself if he did catch the animal. But he finally got a rope over the bull's head, slowed him until 4 more ropes could be thrown over him. Even then, it was all they could do to throw the bull, and it took Pt.14 over 2 hours to sew the huge flap of skin back in place. When it was necessary to turn the bull from one side to another, it took virtually the whole crew, plus 5 horses and ropes, to keep him from getting up again. Then, when the bull did roll, he nearly rolled on Needle Nelson, who hated him anyway and didn't approve of all the doctoring. When the bull nearly rolled on him, Needle retreated to the wagon and refused to come near him again. "I was rooting for the bear," he said. "A bull like that is going to get somebody sooner or later, and it might be me." The next day, the bull was so sore he could barely hobble. Call feared the doctoring had been in vain. The bull fell so far behind the herd that they decided to leave him. He fell several miles behind in the course of the day. Call kept looking back, expecting to see buzzards in the sky. If the bull finally dropped, they would feast. But he saw no buzzards, and a week after the fight, the bull was in the herd again. No one had seen him return, but one morning he was there. He had only 1 horn and 1 eye, and Ocampo's sewing job was somewhat uneven, the folds of skin having separated in 2 or 3 places. But the bull was ornery as ever, bellowing at the cowboys when they came too close. He resumed his habit of keeping well to the front of the herd. His wounds only made him more irascible. The hands gave him a wide berth. As a result of the battle, night herding became even more unpopular. Where there was one grizzly bear, there could be others. The men who had been worrying constantly about Indians began to worry about bears. Those who had chased the wounded bear horseback could not stop talking about how fast he had moved. Though he had only seemed to be loping along, he had easily run off and left them. "There ain't a horse in this outfit that bear couldn't catch, if he wanted to," Dish contended. The observation worried Jasper Fant so much that he lost his appetite and his ability to sleep. He lay awake in his blankets for 3 nights, clutching his gun, and when he couldn't avoid night herding, he felt such anxiety that he usually threw up whatever he ate. He would have quit the outfit, but that would only mean crossing hundreds of miles from bear-infested prairie alone, a prospect he couldn't face. He decided that if he ever got to a town where there was a railroad, he would take a train, no matter where it was going. P.I. too found the prospect of bears disturbing. "If we strike any more, let's all shoot at once," he suggested to the men repeatedly. "I guess if enough of us hit one, it'd fall," he always added. But no one seemed convinced, and no one bothered to reply.
Chapter 92.
When Sally and Betsy asked her questions about her past, Lorena was perplexed. They were just girls. She couldn't tell them the truth. They both idolized her and made much of her adventure at crossing the prairies. Betsy had a lively curiosity and could ask about 100 questions an hour. Sally was more reserved and often chided her sister for prying into Lorena's affairs. "She don't have to tell you about her whole life," Sally would protest. "Maybe she can't remember. I can only remember back to when I was 3. "What happened when you was 3? Lorena asked. "That old turkey pecked me," Sally said. "A wolf got him, and I'm glad." Clara overheard part of the conversation. "I'm getting some more turkeys pretty soon," she said. "Laura's so good with the poultry, I think we might raise a few." The poultry chores had been assigned to Lorena, mainly just feeding the 25 or 30 hens and gathering the eggs. At first, it seemed that such a small household couldn't possibly need so many eggs, and yet they absorbed them effortlessly. July Johnson was a big egg eater, and Clara, who had a ferocious sweet tooth, used them in the cake she was always making. She made so many cakes that everyone got tired of them except her. I've got to have sweets at least, Clara said, eating a piece of cake before she went to bed, or again while she was cooking breakfast. Sweets make up for a lot. It didn't seem to Lorena that Clara had that much that needed making up for. She mostly did what she pleased. What she pleased usually had to do with horses. Housework didn't interest her, and washing in particular didn't interest her. That became Lorena's job, too. Though the girls helped her, they asked questions all the time they worked, and Lorena just gave them whatever answers came into her head. Few of them were true answers. She didn't know if the answers fooled them. The girls were smart. Sometimes she knew she didn't fool them. "Are you going to marry that man?" Betsy asked one day. "He's already got white hair." "That's no reason not to marry," Sally said. "It is too," Betsy insisted. "If he's got white hair, he could die any time." Lorena found that she didn't think about Gus all that much. She was glad she had stayed at Clara's. For almost the first time in her life, she had a decent bed and a clean room and tasteful meals and people around who were kind to her. She liked having the whole room to herself, alone. Of course, she had had a room in Lonesome Dove, but it hadn't been the same. Men could come into that room. Letting them in was the condition of having it. But she didn't have to let anyone into her room at Clara's house, though often she did let Betsy, who suffered from nightmares, into it. One night, Betsy stumbled in, crying. Clara was out of the house, taking one of the strange walks she liked to take. Lorena was surprised and offered to go find Clara, but Betsy wasn't listening. She had come into the bed like a small animal and snuggled into Lorena's arms. Lorena let her stay the night, and from then on, when Betsy had a nightmare, she came to Lorena's room, and Lorena soothed her. Only now and then did she miss Gus, though then she missed him with a painful ache and felt almost desperate to see him. At such times she felt cowardly for not having gone with him, though of course he himself had urged her to stay. She didn't miss the rest of it at all, the cowboys watching her, thinking things about her, the hot tent, the unpredictable storms, and the fleas and mosquitoes that were always there. She didn't miss the fear either, the fear that someday Gus would be off somewhere and Blue Duck would come back. What had happened had been bad enough, but she knew if he ever got her again, it would be worse. Fearing him, missing Gus were mixed together, for Gus was the only person who could protect her from him. Unlike the girls, Clara seldom asked her any questions. Lorena came to wish that she would. For a while, she had an urge to apologize to Clara for not having always been able to be a lady. It seemed to her a miracle that she had been allowed to stay in Clara's house and be one of the family. She looked for it to go bad in some way, but it didn't go bad. The only thing that changed was that Clara spent more and more time with the horses, and less time in the house. "You came at a good time," she said one day as Lorena was coming in from feeding the hens. It was a task Lorena enjoyed. She liked the way the hens chirped and complained. "How's that?" Lorena asked. "I nagged Bob to build this house. I don't really care about a house," Clara said. "We needed it for the girls, but that wasn't why I built it. I just wanted to nag him into it, and I did. The main reason was he wouldn't let me work with the horses, although I'm better with him than he ever was. But he didn't think it fitting. So I thought, all right then, Bob, build me a house. But I'd rather be down with the horses. And now there's nothing to stop me." 2 weeks later, Bob died in the night. Clara went in the morning to change him and found him dead. He looked exactly as he had. He was just no longer breathing. He weighed so little by then that she could lift him. Having long concluded that he would die, she had had Cholo bring a pine coffin from town. He had brought it in at night and hidden it from the girls. It was ready. Clara closed Bob's eyes and sat with her memories for an hour. The girls were downstairs now, pestering Lorena and eating. Now and then she could hear their laughter. They were happy girls. They laughed often. It pleased Clara to hear them. She wondered if Bob could hear his two lively daughters laughing as he lay dying. She wondered if it helped, if it made up in any way for her bad tempers and the deaths of the three boys. He had counted so on those boys. They would be his help. Bob had never talked much, but one thing he did talk about was how much they would get done once the boys got big enough to do their part of the work. Often just hearing him describe the fences they would build, or the barns, or the cattle they would buy, Clara felt out of sorts. It made her feel very distant from Bob that he saw their boys mainly as hired hands that he wouldn't have to pay. He sees them different, she thought. For her part, she just liked to have them there. She liked to look at them as they sat around the table, liked to watch them swimming and frolicking in the river, liked to sit by them sometimes when they slept, listening to them breathe. Yet they had died, and both she and Bob lost what they loved. Bob, his dreams of future work with his sons. She, the immediate pleasure of having sons to look at, to touch, to scold, tease, and kiss. It struck her that endings were never as you would expect them to be. She had thought she would be relieved when Bob finally died. She hadn't felt he was a part of their life anymore, and yet now that he was gone, she knew he had been. A silent part, an uncomfortable part, but still there, still her husband, still the girl's father. He had been changed, but not removed. Now he had gone where her boys had gone. As well as she knew the boys, as much as she loved them, time had robbed her of them. At times she found herself mixing details and events up, not in big ways, but in small. In dreams she saw her sons' faces, and when she awoke could not remember which son she had dreamed about. She wondered if she would dream of Bob, and what she would remember if she thought of him in 10 years. Their marriage had had few high spots. She had often been happy during it, but not because of anything Bob did. She had had more happiness from horses than from her husband, though he had been a decent husband, better than most women had, from what she could judge. She didn't cry, but merely felt a wish. Now he was gone, that she could somehow escape dealing with the tiresome formalities of death. Someone would have to go for a preacher. There would have to be some kind of funeral. They had no close neighbors, but the 2 or 3 closest would still feel they had to come, bring food, pay their respects. She covered Bob with a clean sheet and went downstairs. Lorena was teaching the girls to play cards. They were playing poker for buttons. Clara stood in the shadows, wishing she didn't have to interrupt their fun. Why interrupt it for a death that couldn't be helped? And yet death was not something you could ignore. It had its weight. It was a dead man lying upstairs, not a man who was sick. It seemed to her that she had better not form the practice of ignoring death. If she tried it, death would find a way to answer back. It would take another of her loved ones to remind her to respect it. So she walked into the room. Betsy had just won a hand. She whooped, for she loved to beat her sister. She was a beautiful child
I'm almost
with
done.
curls that would drive men mad someday.
For the most part.
I won the pot, Ma, she said. And then she saw by the grave set of Clara's face that something was wrong. Good, Clara said. A good card player is just what this family needs. Now I have to tell you something sad. Your father's dead. Oh, he ain't, Sally said. Honey, he died just now, Clara said. Sally ran to her, but Betsy turned to Lorena, who was near her. Lorena was surprised, but she put her arms around the child. Could you go get July? Clara asked Lorena, when the girls had calmed a bit. July now lived in a little room attached to the saddle shed. It wouldn't do when winter came, but for summer it was all right. He had never felt comfortable in the house with Clara and the girls, and since Lorena had come, he felt even more uncomfortable. Lorena seldom spoke to him, and Clara mainly discussed horses or other ranch problems, yet he felt nervous in their company. Day to day, he felt it was wrong to have taken the job with Clara. Sometimes he felt a strong longing to be back in his old job in Fort Smith, even if Roscoe was no longer alive to be his deputy. But he had a son now, a baby he saw every day at supper and breakfast. His son was the darling of the ranch. The women and girls passed Martin around as if he belonged to them all. Lorena had developed a rapport with him and took the main responsibility for him when Clara was off with the horses. The baby was happy, and no wonder. With 2 women and 2 girls to spoil him, July could hardly imagine what the women would do if he tried to take the baby and raise him in Arkansas. Anyway, such a plan was not feasible. So he stayed on and did his work, nearly truly content nor bitterly discontented. He still dreamed of Elmira and felt an aching sadness when he thought about her. Despite that ache, the thing that made July least comfortable of all was that he knew he was in love with Clara. The feeling had started even before he knew Elmira was dead, and it grew even when he knew he ought to be grieving for Elmira. He felt guilty about it. He felt hopeless about it, but it was true. At night he thought of her and imagined her in her room, in her gown. At breakfast and supper he watched her, whenever he thought he could do so without her noticing. He had many opportunities, too, for she seemed to have ceased taking any notice of him at all. He had the sense that she had become disappointed in him, though he didn't know why. And when she did look at him, it frightened him. Occasionally, when he caught Clara looking at him, he almost flinched, for he did not imagine that he could hide anything from her. She was too smart. He had the sense that she could figure out anything. Her eyes were mysterious to him. Often she seemed to be amused by him, at other times irritated. Sometimes her eyes seemed to pierce him, as if she had decided to read his thoughts as she would read a book. And then, in a moment, she would lift her head and ignore him, as if he were a book that she had glanced through and found too uninteresting for further perusal. And she was married. Her husband lay sick above their heads, which made his love seem all the more hopeless. But it didn't stop the longing he felt for her. In his daydreams, he fell to reinventing the past, imagining that he had married Clara instead of Elmira. He gave himself a very different marriage. Clara would sit in the loft with her feet dangling all day. She wouldn't have run off on a whiskey boat. Probably she wouldn't have cared that Jake Spoon shot Benny. He imagined them raising horses and children together. Of course, they had begun to do just that, raise horses and children together. But the reality was far different from the daydream. They weren't together. He could not go into her room at night and talk to her. He knew that if he could, he probably wouldn't be able to think of much to say. Or if he did and said something stupid, Clara would answer sharply. Still, he longed for it and lay awake at night in his little shed thinking of her. He was doing that when Lorena came to tell him Bob was dead. Hearing the footsteps, he had hoped that it was Clara, and he pictured her face in his mind, not stern, impersonal, as it often was when she was directing some work, but soft, smiling, as it might be if she were playing with Martin at the dinner table. He opened the door and saw to his surprise that it was Lorena. He died, Lorena said. Who? July asked absently. Her husband, Lorena said. Then she's free, July thought. He couldn't feel sad. Well, I guess it's for the best, he said. The man wasn't getting no better. Lorena noticed that he sounded happier than she had heard him sound since she had arrived at the ranch. She knew exactly what it meant. She had often seen him looking at Clara with helpless love in his eyes. She herself didn't care one way or the other about July Johnson, but the dumb quality of his love annoyed her. Many men had looked at her that way, and She was not flattered by it. They wanted to pretend, such men, that they were different, that she was different, and that what might happen between them would be different than it would ever be. They wanted to pretend that they wanted pretty dresses and smiles, when what they really wanted was for her to lay down under them. That was the real wish beneath all the pretty wishes men had. And when she was under them, they could look down and pretend something pretty was happening. But she would look up and only see a dumb face above her, strained, dishonest, and anything but pretty. She wants you to bring the coffin, she said to July, watching him. Let Clara worry about the man. Watching him only made her long for Gus. He gave things that no one else could give. He wasn't dumb, and he didn't pretend that he wanted smiles when he wanted a poke. They put the coffin in the front room, and July carried the frail corpse downstairs and put him in the coffin. Then, on Clara's instructions, he rode off to inform the few neighbors to find a preacher. Clara and Lorena and the girls sat with the body all night, while Cholo dug a grave on the ridge above the barn where the boys were buried. Betsy slept most of the night in Lorena's arms. Clara thought it nice that she had taken to the young woman so. At dawn, Clara went out and took Cholo some coffee. He had finished digging and was sitting on the mound of earth that would soon cover Bob. Walking toward the ridge in the early sunlight, Clara had the momentary sense that they were all watching her, the boys and Bob. The vision lasted a second. It was Cholo who was watching her. It was windy and the grass waved over the graves of the three boys. 4 now, she felt. In memory, Bob seemed like a boy to her also. He had a boyish innocence that kept to the end. Despite the strains of work and marriage in a rough place, it often irritated her, that innocence of his. She had felt it to be laziness. It left her alone to do the thinking, which she resented. Yet she had loved him too. He had never been a knowing man in the way that Gus was knowing, or even Jake Spoon. When she decided to marry Bob, Jake, who was a hothead, grew red in the face and proceeded to throw a fit. It had disturbed him terribly. She had chosen someone he thought was dumb. Gus had been better behaved, if no less puzzled. She remembered how it pleased her to thwart them, to make them realize that her measure was different from theirs. I'll always know where he is, she told Gus. It was the only explanation she ever offered. Now, indeed, she would know where he was. Cholo was watching her to see if she was
row
hurt.
2 up.
He loved
I got
Clara.
some of it folded.
He tried in small ways to make life easier for her, although he had concluded long before.
No, they haven't done is all my socks and everything else.
She would be somber, stand by the fence for an hour, not saying a word to anyone. Other times there would be something working in her that scared the horses. He thought of Clara as like the clouds. Sometimes the small black ones would pour out of the north. They seemed to roll over and over as they swept across the sky, like tumbleweeds. On some mornings, things rolled inside Clara and made her tense and snappish. She could do nothing with the horses on days like that. They became as she was, and Cholo would try gently to persuade her that it was not a good day to do the work. Other days, her spirit was quiet and calm. The horses felt that too. Those were the days they made progress in training.
Yeah, for the most part.
Clara had brought
The next is just pretty much
She was very glad to be out
separating
of the
my
house.
socks,
She
and
poured
that's
Cholo's
about it.
coffee and then poured some for herself. She sat down on the mound of dirt beside him and looked into the open grave. Sometimes it seems like grave digging is all we do, she said. But that's wrong. I guess if we lived in a big town, it wouldn't seem that way. I guess in New York, there are so many people you don't notice the dying so much. People come faster than they go. Out here, it shows more when people go, especially when it's your people. Mr. Bob, he didn't know mares, Cholo said, remembering that ignorance had been his downfall. No, Clara said, he didn't know mares. They sat quietly for a while, drinking coffee. Watching Clara, Cholo felt sad. He did not believe she had ever been happy. Always her eyes seemed to be looking for something that wasn't there. She might look pleased for a time, watching her daughters or watching some young horse, but then the rolling would start inside her again. The pleased look would give way to one that was sad. "What do you think happens when you die?" she asked. Surprising. Cholo shrugged. He had seen much death, but had not thought much about it. Time enough to think about it when it happened. "Not too much," he said. "You're just dead." "Maybe it ain't as big a change as we think," Clara said. "Maybe you just stay around near where you lived, near your family, or wherever you was happiest. Only you're just a spirit, and you don't have the troubles the living have." A minute later, she shook her head and stood up. "I guess that's silly," she said, and started back to the house. That afternoon, July came back with the minister. The two nearest neighbors came, German families. Clara had seen more of the men than of the women. The men would come to buy horses and stay for a meal. She almost regretted having notified them. Why should they interrupt their work just to see Bob put in the ground? They sang 2 hymns, the Germans singing loudly in poor English. Mrs. Jinch, the wife of one of the German farmers, weighed over 300 pounds. The girls had a hard time not staring at her. The buggy she rode in tilted far to one side under her weight. The minister was invited to stay the night and got rather drunk after supper. He was known to drink too much when he got the chance. His name was Reverend Spinot, and he had a large purple birthmark under one ear. A widower, he was easily excited by the presence of women. He was writing a book on prophecy and rattled on about it as they all sat in the living room. Soon both Clara and Lorena felt like choking him. "Will you be thinking of moving into town now, Mrs. Allen?" the Reverend asked hopefully. It was worth the inconvenience of the funeral way out in the country to sit with 2 women for a while. "No, we'll be staying right here," Clara said. July and Cholo carried out the mattress Bob had died on. It needed a good airing. Betsy cried a long time that night, and Lorena went up to be with her. It was better than listening to a minister go on about prophecy. The baby was colicky, and Clara rocked him while the minister drank. July came in and asked if there was anything else she needed him to do. "No," Clara said. But July
Hey,
sat
High Life,
down
how you
anyway.
doing, bro?
He felt he
Hope
should
you're doing
offer
good.
to rock his son, but knew the baby would just cry louder if he took him away from Clara. The minister finally fell asleep on the sofa, and then, to their surprise, rolled off on the floor and began to snore loudly. "Do you want me to carry him out?" July asked, hoping to feel useful. "He could sleep in the wagon just as well." "Let him lie," Clara said, thinking it had been an odd day. "I doubt it's the first time he slept on a floor. And anyway, he isn't your lookout." She knew July was in love with her and was irritated that he was so awkward about it. He was as innocent as Bob, but she didn't feel moved to patience in July's case. She would save her patience for his son, who slept at her breast, whimpering now and then. Soon she got up with the baby and went to her room, leaving July sitting silently in a chair while the drunken minister snored on the floor. Once upstairs, she called Sally. Sally had not cried much. When she came into Clara's room, she looked drawn. Almost immediately, she began to sob. Clara put the baby down and held her daughter. "Oh, I'm so bad," Sally said when she could talk. "I wanted Daddy to die. I didn't like it that he just lay up there with his eyes open. It was like he was a spook. Only now I wish he hadn't died." "Hush," Clara said. "You ain't bad. I wanted him to die too." "And now you wish he hadn't, Ma?" Sally asked. "I wish he had been more careful around horses, is what I wish," Clara said.
Chapter 93.
As the herd and the Hat
Got
Creek
one
outfit
rolled up,
slowly
but
rode into
I'll be
Montana
right
out
back.
of the barren Wyoming plain, it seemed to all of them that they were leaving behind not only heat and drought, but ugliness and danger too. Instead of being chalky and covered with tough sage, the rolling plains were covered with tall grass and a sprinkling of yellow flowers. The roll of the plains got longer. The heat shimmers that they had looked through all summer gave way to cool air, crisp in the mornings and cold at night.
I'll
They
be right
rode for
back.
days beside the Bighorn Mountains, whose peaks were sometimes hidden in cloud. The coolness of the air seemed to improve the men's eyesight. They fell to speculating about how many miles they could see. The plains stretched north before them. They saw plenty of game, mainly deer and antelope. Once they saw a large herd of elk and twice small groups of buffalo. They saw no more bears, but bears were seldom far from their thoughts. The cowboys had lived for months under the great bowl of the sky, and yet the Montana skies seemed deeper than the skies of Texas or Nebraska. Their depth and blueness robbed even the sun of its harsh force. It seemed smaller in the vastness, and the whole sky no longer turned white at noon as it had in the lower plains. Always somewhere to the north there was a swath of blueness, with white clouds floating in it like petals in a pond. Call had scarcely spoken since the death of Dietz, but the beauty of the high prairies, the abundance of game, the coolness of the mornings finally raised his spirits. It was plain that Jake Spoon, who had been wrong about most things, had been right about Montana. It was a cattleman's paradise, and they were the only cattlemen in it. The grassy plains seemed limitless, stretching north. It was strange that they had seen no Indians, though. Often he mentioned this to Augustus. Custer didn't see him either, Augustus pointed out. Not till he was caught. Now that we're here, do you plan to stop? Or will we just keep going north till we get into the polar bears? I plan to stop, but not yet, Call said. We ain't crossed the Yellowstone. I like the thought of having the first ranch north of the Yellowstone. But you ain't a rancher, Augustus said. I guess I am now. No, you're a fighter. We should have left these damn cows down in Texas. You use them as an excuse to come up here when you ain't interested in them and didn't need an excuse anyway. I think we ought to just give them to the Indians when the Indians show up. Give the Indians 3,000 cattle? Call said, amazed at the notions his friend had. Why do that? Because then we'd be shut of them. We could follow our noses for a change instead of following their asses. Ain't you bored? I don't think like you do, Call said. They're ours. We got them. I don't plan on giving them to anybody. I miss Texas and I miss whiskey, Augustus said. Now here we are in Montana and there's no telling what will become of us. Miles City's up here somewhere, Call said. You can buy whiskey. Yes, but I'll have to drink it indoors, Augustus complained. It's cool up here. As if to confirm his remark, the very next day an early storm blew out of the Bighorns. An icy wind came up and snow fell in the night. The men on the night herd wrapped blankets around themselves to keep warm. A thin snow covered the plains in the morning, to the amazement of everyone. The Spettle boy was so astonished to wake and see it that he refused to come out of his blankets at first, afraid of what might happen. He lay wide-eyed, looking at the whiteness. Only when he saw the other hands tramping in it without ill effect did he get up. Newt had been curious about snow all the way north, but he had lost his jacket somewhere in Kansas, and now that snow had actually fallen, he felt too cold to enjoy it. All he wanted to do was be warm again. He had taken his boots off when he lay down to sleep, and the snow had melted on his feet, getting his socks wet. His boots were a tight fit, and it was almost impossible to get them on over wet socks. He went over to the fire barefoot, hoping to dry his socks, but so many of the cowboys were huddled around the fire that he couldn't get a place at first. P.I. had scooped up a handful of snow and was eating it. The Rainy boys made snowballs, but all the cowboys were stiff and cold and looked threatening, so the Rainey boys merely threw the snowballs at one another. "This snow tastes like hail, except that it's soft," P.I. observed. The sun came out just then and shone so brightly on the white plains that some of the men had to shield their eyes. Newt finally got a place by the fire, but by then the captain was anxious to move on and he didn't try to dry his socks. He tried to pull his boots on, but had no luck until Pocampo noticed his difficulty and came over with a little flour, which he sprinkled in the boots. "This will help," he said. And he was right, though getting the boots on still wasn't easy. The sun soon melted the thin snow, and for the next week the days were hot again. Pocampo walked all day behind the wagon, followed by the pigs, who bored through the tall grass like moles, a sight that amused the cowboys, although Augustus worried the pigs might stray off. "We ought to let them ride in the wagon," he suggested to Call. "I don't see why." "Well, they've made history," Augustus pointed out. "When?" Call asked. "I didn't notice." "Well, they're the first pigs to walk all the way from Texas to Montana. That's quite a feat for a pig." "What will it get them?" Call inquired. "Eaten by a bear if they ain't careful, or eaten by us if they are. They've had a long walk for nothing." "Yes, and the same's likely true for us," Augustus said, irritated that his friend wasn't more appreciative of pigs. With Dietz dead, Augustus and Call alternated the scouting duties. One day, Augustus asked Newt to ride along with him, much to Newt's surprise. In the morning, they saw a grizzly, but the bear was far upwind and didn't scent them. It was a beautiful day, no clouds in the sky. Augustus rode with his big rifle propped across the saddle. He was in the highest of spirits. They rode ahead of the herd some 15 miles or more, and yet when they stopped to look back, they could still see the cattle, tiny black dots in the middle of the plain, with the southern horizon still far behind them. "I never thought to see so far," Newt said. "Ain't it something?" Augustus said with a grin. "This is rare country, this Montana. We're a lucky bunch. There ain't nothing better than this. Though you don't have to tell your pa I said it." Newt had decided it must be one of Mr. Gus's many jokes, making out that the captain was his pa. "I like to keep Woodrow feeling that he's caused a peck of trouble. I don't want him to get sassy, but I wouldn't have missed coming up here. I can't think of nothing better than riding a fine horse into a new country. It's exactly what I was meant for, and Woodrow too." "You think we'll see Indians?" Newt asked. "You bet. We might all get killed this afternoon for all I know. That's the wild for you. It's got its dangers, which is part of the beauty. Of course, the Indians have had this land forever. To them, it's precious because it's old. To us, it's exciting because it's new." Newt noticed that Mr. Gus had a keen look in his eye. His white hair was long, almost to his shoulders. There seemed to be no one who could enjoy himself like Mr. Gus. "Now, there's women, of course. I do cotton to them, but I ain't found one yet who could hold me back from a chance like this. Women are persistent creatures.
Yeah,
We'll
and
try
that's
to
the
nail
one
you
wear
down.
safety glasses.
But if you just dance on off, you'll usually find them close
So
to
you
the
get
spot
one more
where
rolled up, and then we do some dabs.
"Do you really know who my pa is?" he asked. Mr. Gus was being so friendly, he felt he could ask. "Oh, Woodrow Call is your pa, son," Augustus said, as if it were a matter of casual knowledge. For the first time, Newt felt it might be true, although extremely puzzling. "Well, he never mentioned it," he pointed out. Just being told such news didn't settle much. In fact, it just made new problems, for if the captain was his father, then why hadn't he mentioned it? "It's a subtle problem," Augustus said. Newt didn't find that a helpful answer, mainly because he didn't know what subtle meant. "Looks like he mentioned it," he said softly. He didn't want to criticize the captain, especially not to Mr. Gus, the only man who did criticize the captain. It wouldn't be his way to mention it. Woodrow don't mention nothing that he can keep from mentioning. You couldn't call him a mentioner. Newt found it very puzzling. If the captain was his father, then he must have known his mother, but he had never mentioned that either. He could remember times when he had daydreamed that the captain was his father, would take him on long trips. Now, in a way, the daydream had come true. The captain had taken him on a long trip.
Hey,
But
Silly, how you
feeling
doing?
proud and happy, he felt let down and confused. If it was true, why had everybody been such a long time mentioning it? Dietz had never mentioned it. P.I. had never mentioned it. Worst of all, his mother had never mentioned it. He had been young when she died, but not too young to remember something so important. He could still remember some of the songs that she had sung to him. He could have remembered who his father was. It didn't make sense. And he rode beside Mr. Gus for several miles, puzzling about it silently. Did you ask me to come along to tell me? Newt asked finally. Yep, Augustus admitted. Newt knew he ought to thank him, but he didn't feel in the mood to thank anybody. The information just seemed to make his whole life more puzzling. It spoiled every good thing he had felt for most of his life, not only about his mother, but about the captain and about the Hat Creek outfit as a whole. I know it's tardy news, Augustus said. Since Woodrow ain't a mentioner, I thought I'd tell you. You never know what might happen.
Chapter 94.
I wish I'd known sooner, Newt said. It was the one thing he was sure of. Yes, I expect you do. I ought to have discussed it sooner. It was really Woodrow's place to tell you, and I kept hoping he'd do it, though I knew he wouldn't. Is it that he don't like me? Newt asked. He felt a longing to be back in Texas. The news coming when it did had spoiled Montana. No, Augustus said. What you have to understand is that Woodrow Call is a peculiar man. He likes to think that things are a certain way. He likes to think everybody does their duty, especially him. He likes to think people live for duty. I don't know what started him thinking that way. He ain't dumb. He knows perfectly well that people don't live for duty. But he won't admit it about anybody if he can help it. And he especially won't admit it about himself. Newt saw that Mr. Gus was laboring to explain it to him, but it was no good. So far as he could tell, the captain did live for duty. What did that have to do with the captain being his father? Woodrow don't like to admit that he's like the rest of us, Augustus said, seeing the boy's perplexity. He ain't, Newt said. That was obvious. The captain never behaved like other people. He ain't, that's true. But he had a chance to be once. He turned his back on it. And now he ain't about to admit he made the wrong choice. He'd as soon kill himself. He's got to keep trying to be the way that he thinks he is. And he's got to make out that he was always that way. It's why he ain't owned up to being your pa. Soon they turned and headed back toward the herd. It's funny. I knew my pa. He was a gentleman. He didn't do much but raise horses and hounds and drink whiskey. He never hit me a lick in my life, or even raised his voice to me. He drank whiskey every night and disappointed my mother. But both my sisters doted on him like he was the only man. In fact, one of them's an old maid to this day because she doted on Dad. But Dad never interested me. I let out from that place when I was 13 years old. I ain't stopped yet. I didn't care one way or the other for Dad. I just seen that horses and hounds get boring if you tried to make them alive. I expect I'd have wrecked every marriage in that county if I'd stayed in Tennessee, or else got killed in a duel. Newt knew Mr. Gus was trying to be kind, but he wasn't listening. Much of his life, he had wondered who his father was and where he might be. He felt it would be a relief to know, but now he knew, and it wasn't a relief. There was something in it that thrilled him. He was Captain Call's son, but more than felt sad.
Oh, yeah.
He was glad when Mr. Gus put the horses in a lope. He didn't have to think as much. They loped over the grassy plains toward the cattle in the far distance. The cattle looked tiny as ants. The men began to talk of the Yellowstone River as if it were a place where the world ended, or at least a place where the drive would end. In their thinking, it had taken on a magical quality, partly because no one really knew anything about it. Jasper Fant had somehow picked up the rumor that the Yellowstone was the size of the Mississippi and as deep. All the way north, everyone had been trying to convince Jasper that it didn't really make any difference how deep a river was once it got deep enough to swim a horse. But Jasper felt the argument violated common sense. The deeper the river, the more dangerous. That was axiomatic to him. He had heard about something called undercurrents, which could suck you down. The deeper the river, the farther down you could be sucked, and Jasper had a profound fear of being sucked down. Particularly, he didn't want to be sucked down in the Yellowstone. He had made himself a pair of rude floats from some empty lard buckets, just in case the Yellowstone really did turn out to be as deep as the Mississippi. "I didn't come all this way just to drown in the last darn river," Jasper said. "It ain't the last," Augustus said. "Montana don't stop at the Yellowstone. The Missouri's up there somewhere, and it's a whale of a river." "Well, I don't aim to cross it," Jasper said. It seemed to him that he had spent half the trip imagining how it would be to be sucked down into a deep river. He wanted it understood that he was only willing to take so many chances. "I guess you'll cross it if the captain wants to keep going," Dish said. Jasper's river fears grated on everybody's nerves. Nobody liked crossing rivers, but it didn't help to talk about the dangers constantly for 3,000
You might have to go get my other debris.
"Well, Jake talked of the Milk River and one called the Marion," Augustus said. "Looks like you'd be satisfied," Jasper said. "Ain't we traveled enough?"
Yeah, I gotta go get my other one. This one's pretty much dead.
Myself. I'd like to see my home again while my folks are still alive. "Well, that ain't the plan. We're up here to start a ranch. Home and hearth don't interest us. We hired you men for life. You ought to have said goodbye to the old folks before you left." "What are we going to do now that we're here?" Libby asked. The question was on everyone's mind. Usually when the cattle drive ended, the men just turned around and went back to Texas. But then most drives stopped in Kansas, which seemed close to home compared to where they were now. Many of them harbored secret doubts about their ability to navigate a successful return to Texas. Of course, they knew the direction, but they would have to make the trip in winter. The Indians that hadn't been troublesome on the way north might want to fight as they went south.
I'm charging up. I gotta
I like a town, Libby.
go grab my other debris because this one's dead.
Don't have to be St. Louis, just a town. As long as it has a saloon or two, I can get by. But I wasn't meant to live out in the open during the winter. Call knew the men were wondering, but he wasn't ready to stop. Jake had said some of the most beautiful land was far to the north, near Canada. It would be a pity to stop and make a choice before they had looked around thoroughly. He contemplated leaving the men and going on a look around himself, north of the Yellowstone, but decided against it, mainly because of Indians. Things looked peaceful, but that didn't mean they would stay peaceful. There could easily be a bad fight, and he didn't want to be gone if one came. Finally, he decided to send Augustus. "I hate to give you the first look. Somebody's got to look," he said. "Would you want to go?" "Oh, sure," Augustus said. "I'd be happy to get away from all this tedious conversation. Maybe I'll trot through this Miles City community and see if anyone stocks champagne." "Take the look around first, if you can be bothered," Carl said. "I doubt the main street in Miles City would make a good ranch, and I doubt you'll get any further once you spot a saloon. We need to find a place and get some shelters built before winter hits. Take a man with you. We should get into trouble." I can get myself out of trouble. But if I have to lead some quaking spirit like Jasper Fan, it'll slow me down. None of these cowpokes is exactly wilderness hands. We buried the last reliable man down on the Powder. Remember? I remember, Carl said. You don't want to make too many mistakes in this part of the country. You'll end up bare shit. Take Pete, Carl said. He can follow orders. Yes, that's what he can do, Augustus said. I guess I'll take him, though he won't provide much conversation. P.I. was not enthusiastic about going on a scout with Gus, but since the captain told him to, he tied his bedroll on his saddle and got ready. Other than securing his bedroll, his preparations consisted mainly of sharpening his knife. One thing P.I. firmly believed was that it was foolish to start on a trip without a sharp knife. Inevitably, on a trip, there were things that needed cutting, skinning, and trimming. Once his knife was sharp, P.I. was ready, more or less. He knew he wouldn't get much relaxation on the trip because he was traveling with Gus, and Gus talked all the time. It was hard to relax.
Gotta be right back. Constantly listening.
Besides, Gus was always asking questions which were hard to understand, much less answer. It was a breezy morning when they started out. A dark cloud bank had formed at the northwest, and men were talking of snow. I said way back in Lonesome Dub we'd be crossing the darn Yellowstone on ice if we didn't get started, Jasper reminded them. Now all this time has passed, and I may be right. Even if you was right, you'd be wrong, Jasper, Augustus said as he stuffed an extra box or two of ammunition in his saddlebag. I'd like to know why, Gus, Jasper said, annoyed that Gus was always singling him out for criticism. I'll explain it when I get back, Augustus said. Come on, P. Let's go see if we can find Canada. They loped off, watched by the whole camp. The crew had been made melancholy by the approaching clouds. Ocampo had wandered off looking for roots. Augustus and P.I. passed it nearly a mile from camp. Oh, you're a rambler, Augustus said. What do you expect to find on this old plain?
A little toke-stone.
Wild onions, Ocampo said. I'd like an onion. I'd like a jug of bourbon whiskey myself, Augustus said. I wonder which one of us can get his wish. Adios, Ocampo said. A day and a half later, the two scouts rode over a grassy bluff and saw the Yellowstone River a few miles away. 50 or 60 buffalo were watering when they rode up. At the sight of the horsemen, the buffalo scattered. The cloud bank had blown away and the blue sky was clear for as far as one could see. The river was swift but not deep. Augustus paused in his crossing and leaned down, drinking from his cupped hands. The water was cold. Sweet water, but it don't compare with bourbon whiskey, he said. Jasper won't need them floats, P.I. remarked. He might, Augustus said. He might fall off his horse if he gets real nervous. Let's chase the buffalo for a while. Why? He asked. Ocampo had packed plenty of meat. He couldn't imagine why Gus would bother with buffalo. They were cumbersome to skin, and he and Gus had no need for so much meat. Nonetheless, it was follow or be left, for Augustus had loped off after the buffalo, who had only run about a mile. He soon put them into flight again and raced along beside them, riding close to the gate. P.I., caught by surprise, was left far behind in the race. He kept expecting to hear Gus's big rifle, but he didn't. After a run of about 2 miles, he came upon Gus sitting peacefully. The buffalo were still running, 2 or 3 miles ahead. Kill any? P. asked. No, I wasn't hunting, Augustus said. Did you just want to run them off or what? P. asked. As usual, Gus's behavior was a complete puzzle. P, you ain't got your grip on the point. I just wanted to chase a buffalo once more. I won't have the chance much longer, and nobody else will either, because there won't be no buffalo to chase. It's a grand. Them bulls can hook you, P.I. reminded him. Remember old Barlow? A buffalo bull hooked his horse. The horse fell on Barlow and broke his hip. Barlow was a slow faker, Augustus observed. He just loped along and got hooked. A slow walker, too, once his hip got broke. I wonder what happened to Barlow. I think he migrated to Salem or somewhere over there, Augustus said. That widow had to pass law. You ought to have done the same, but here you are in Montana. Well, I'd hate not to be a bachelor, P.I. said. Just because it's all you know don't mean it's all you know. You had a chance and fine widow right there, Lonesome Dove, as I recall. P.I. was sorry the subject of widows had come up. He had nearly forgotten the widow Cole and the day he had helped her take the washing off the line. He didn't know why he hadn't forgotten it completely. He surely had forgotten more important things. Yet there it was, and from time to time it shoved into his brain. If he had married some widow, his brain would probably have been so full of such things that he would have no time to think, or even keep his knife sharp. Ever meet any of
I'm
the
not having
men?
too bad a day.
Augustus asked.
Can't complain too much
They
more.
got up
Or
in
too
here and
much,
took
should I
the
say.
beavers. Well, I met old Kit. You ought to remember. You was there. Yes, I remember, Augustus said. I never thought much of Kit Carson. Why? What was wrong with Kit Carson? They say he could track anything. Kit was vain. I won't tolerate vanity in a man, though I will in a woman. If I'd gone north in my youth, I might have got to be a mountain man. But I took the riverboat instead. The whores on them riverboats in my day barely wore enough clothes to pat a crutch. As they rode north, they saw more buffalo, mostly small bunches of 20 or 30. The third day north of the Yellowstone, they killed a crippled buffalo calf and dined on its liver. In the morning when they left, there was a number of buzzards and 2 or 3 prairie wolves hanging around waiting for them to leave the carcass. It was a beautiful morning, crisp for an hour or two, and then sunny and warm. The country rolled on to the north, as it had for thousands of miles, brown in the distance, prairie grass waving in the breeze. Lord, how much land does the captain want? P.I. asked. Looks like this country around here would be good enough for anybody. Plenty would settle for it. You're right, Augustus said. Carl might himself. But let's go on for a day or two more. We ain't struck the Milk River yet. Does it run milk? P.I. asked. Now think a minute, P. How could it run milk when there's no cows up here yet? Why did they call it the milk then? Milk is milk. Crazy is crazy, too, Augustus said. That's what I'll be before long listening to you. Crazy. Well, Jasper's mind might break if he don't stop worrying about them rivers, P.I. allowed. I expect the rest of us will keep our wits. Augustus laughed heartily at the notion of the Hat Creek outfit keeping its wits. It's true that they could be kept in a thimble, he said.
Yep, lighting
But who
number
brought a
1.
thimble? There was a little rise to the west, and Augustus loped over to it to see what the land looked like in that direction. He trotted along north, as he had been doing, not paying much attention. Gus was always loping off to test the view, as he called it, and P didn't feel obliged to follow him every time. Then P heard the sound of a running horse and looked for Gus, supposing he had jumped another little bunch of buffalo. What he saw froze in place. Gus was racing down the little slope he had just gone up, with at least 20 mounted Indians hot on his heels. He must have ridden right into them. The Indians were shooting both guns and arrows. A bullet cut the grass ahead of P, and he yanked out his rifle and popped a shot back at the Indians before whirling his horse and fleeing. Gus and he had crossed a good-sized creek less than an hour back, with some trees along it and some weeds and shrubbery in the creek bed. He assumed Gus might be racing for that, since it was the only shelter on the wide prairie. Even as he started, P saw 5 or 6 Indians veer toward him. He swerved over to join Gus, who had 2 arrows in his leg. Gus was flailing his horse with his rifle barrel. The horse was running full out. Fortunately, the Indians were poorly mounted. Their horses were no match for the Hat Creek horses, and the 2 men soon widened the gap between them and their pursuers. They were out of range of arrows and of bullets, too, P hoped. But he had hardly hoped it when a bullet stung him just above the shoulder blade. But the creek was only 3 or 4 miles ahead. If they could make it, there would be time enough to worry about wounds. Gus was trying to pull the arrows out of his leg as he rode, but he was having no luck. They saw the curve of the little creek from 2 miles away and angled for the nearest juncture. The Indians had fallen nearly a quarter of a mile back, but were still coming. When they struck the creek, Augustus raced along the bank until he found a spot where the weeds and brush were thickest. Then he jumped his horse off the bank and grabbed his saddlebags.
That's why
Get
that
all
comes
the
in handy.
ammunition you can.
Saves my fingers a lot, especially if I'm playing the game.
And tie the horses in the best cover you can find, or they'll shoot them. This is long country to be a fool. Then he hobbled to the bank, wishing he had had time to cut the 2 arrows out of his leg. But if they were poisoned, it was already too late. And if he didn't do some fine shooting, it wouldn't matter anyway, because the Indians would overrun them. Pete heard the big Henry rifle begin to roar as he dragged the sweating horses into the thickest part of the underbrush. It was thick but low, and he didn't think there was much chance for the horses. He yanked the saddlebags and bedrolls off both horses, was hiding them under the bank when Gus stopped firing for a moment. Get my saddle, he said. I'll show you a trick. Then he began to fire again. Evidently, he had turned the Indians, or they would already have been in the creek bed. He dutifully got the saddle. When he got back, Gus was reloading. He peeked over the bank and saw the Indians stop some distance away. Many of them had dismounted and were standing behind their horses, using their shields. How many did you kill? He asked. Not but 3, Augustus said. This is a smart bunch we're up against. They seen right off a rush and cost them dear. I watched the Indians for a while. They weren't yelling, and they didn't seem excited. I don't see what's so smart about them, he said. They're just standing there. Yes, but they're out of range, Augustus said. They're hoping to tempt me to waste ammunition. Augustus propped the saddle on the bank in such a way that he could shoot under it and be that much safer if the Indians shot back. He then proceeded to shoot 6 times rapidly. 5 of the Indians' horses dropped. The 6th ran squealing over the prairie. It fell several hundred yards away. The Indians fired several shots in reply, their bullets slicing harmlessly into the underbrush. The party of Indians then split. Several Indians went north of them, several south, and 8 or 10 stayed where they were. Well, we're practically surrounded, Augustus said. I don't expect we'll hear any more from them till dark. I'd hate to wait around here till dark, P.I. said. Did you know your shot? Augustus asked. P had forgotten it. The front of his shirt was soaked with blood. He took it off. Augustus examined the wound, which was clean. The bullet had gone right through. They turned their attention to the arrows in Augustus's left leg. Augustus twisted them whenever he got a moment. One arrow he soon got out, but the other wouldn't budge. Oh, this one's deep, he said. That brave wasn't more than 20 yards away when he let fly. I think it's worked under the bone, but it ain't poison. If it was, I'd be feeling it by now. P had a try at removing the arrow, while Gus gritted his teeth, held his leg steady with both hands. The arrow wouldn't budge. It wouldn't even turn, though P.I. twisted hard enough to cause a stream of blood to flow down Gus's leg. As they were working with the arrow, there was a sudden terrified squeal from the horses. Augustus hobbled over, drawing his pistol, and saw that both horses were down, their throats cut. their blood very bright on the green weeds and bushes. "Stay back, Pete," he said, crouching.
That's good that he's
Indian
getting
that had
better.
killed the horses was there somewhere in the underbrush, but he couldn't see him. "Watch to the north, Pete," he said. "I don't think these boys want to stay around here till dark either." He quickly wiped the sweat from his forehead, keeping his eyes directly in front of him. He edged very slowly to the bank, just high enough that he could see the tops of the weeds and underbrush. Then he waited. Once the dying horses finally stopped thrashing, it was very still.
And that's still
Augustus
good.
regretted that his preoccupation with the arrows had made him so lax that he had failed to protect the horses. It put them in a ticklish spot. It was over 100 miles back to the Yellowstone, and in all likelihood the herd hadn't even gotten there yet. He kept his eyes focused on the tops of the underbrush. It was perfectly windless in the creek bottom, and if the underbrush moved, it would be because someone moved it. His big pistol was cocked. He didn't move, and time stretched out. Minutes passed. Augustus carefully kept the sweat wiped out his forehead, concentrating on keeping his focus. The silence seemed to ring. It was so absolute. There were no flies buzzing yet, no birds flying, nothing. He would have bet the Indian was not 20 yards away from him, and yet he had no inkling of precisely where he was. "Ain't you coming back, Gus?" P.I. asked after several minutes. Augustus didn't. He watched the tops of the weeds patiently. It was no time for hurry, much less for conversation. Patience was an Indian virtue. He himself didn't have it in day-to-day life, but he could summon it when it seemed essential. Then he heard a movement behind him and glanced around quickly to see P had suddenly decided to take a stroll. When he did, he saw the edge of a rifle extending an inch or two from the weeds, pointed not at himself but at P. He immediately fired twice into the weeds, and an Indian flopped over as a fish might flop. A second later, when the echo of the gun died, he heard a click a few yards to his right. He whirled and fired at it. A moment later, the underbrush began to shake as if a huge snake were wriggling through it. Augustus ran into the weeds and saw the wounded Indian trying to crawl away. He at once shot him in the back of the head, didn't stop to turn him over. Backing out of the weeds, he stepped on the pistol and fired. A ball gun. He stuck it in his belt and hurried back to P, who looked white. He had sense enough to realize he'd just almost been shot. Augustus glanced at the other dead Indian, a fat boy of maybe 17. His rifle was an old Sharp's carbine, which Augustus threw to P. "We got
That's definitely a good story.
This cover's working against us, but for luck, we'd both be dead already. What we need is a steep bank and no cover." They worked their way upstream, carrying the saddlebags and guns. For nearly a mile, hugging the bank. Augustus was limping badly, but didn't stop to worry about it. Finally, they came to a bend in the creek, where the bank was sheer and about 10 feet high. The creek bottom was nearly bare of foliage. "Let's dig," Augustus said, and began to work with his hands to create a shallow cave under the bank. They worked furiously for half an hour until both were drenched with sweat and covered with dirt. Augustus used the stock of the Indian boy's carbine as a rude shovel and tried to shape the dirt they raked out into low breastworks on either side of the cave. They watched as best they could, but saw no Indians. "Maybe they gave up," P.I. said. "You've killed 5 so far." "5 reasons why they won't give up. They'll fight for their dead, since they expect to meet them again. Ain't you learned that by now?" P.I. could not be sure that he had learned anything about Indians except that he was scared of them, and he had learned that long before he ever saw one. The digging was hard work, but they didn't dare stop. The Indians might show up at any time. "Which Indians is these we're fighting?" he asked.
Oh, they called you?
"They didn't introduce
Nice. What'd they tell you?"
"It might be written on these arrows. I'm going to be one-legged if we don't get this other arrow out pretty soon." No sooner had he said it than it began to rain arrows, all arcing through the south bank of the creek. "Crawl in," Augustus said. He and P scrunched back into the cave and stacked the saddlebags in front of them. Many of the arrows went over the creek bed entirely and into the prairie on the other side. A few stuck in the earthworks they had thrown up, and one or two fell in the air. They're just hoping to get lucky, Augustus said. If my darn leg was better, I'd sneak over to the other side of the creek and whittle down the odds a little more. The shower of arrows soon stopped, but the two men stayed in the
$100
cave,
song? Nice.
I've got to push this arrow on through, Augustus said. I may pass out, and if I do, I better do it now. When it gets dark, we'll both need to be watching. He stopped talking, listened. He put his finger to his lips, so P.I. would be quiet. Someone was on the bank above them, at least one Indian, maybe more. He motioned to P to have his pistol ready in case the Indians tried to rush them. Augustus was hoping for a rush, confident that with the two of them shooting, they could decimate the Indians to such an extent that the survivors might leave. If the Indians couldn't be discouraged and driven off, then the situation was serious. They had no horses. The herd was more than 100 miles away, and he was crippled. They could follow the creek down to the Yellowstone, perhaps strike Miles City, but it would be a slow trip for him to make crippled. Given his choices of gambles, he would prefer a fight. They might even be able to catch one of the Indians' horses. But the rush never came. Whoever was above them left. The creek bank on their side was already in shadow. Augustus uncocked his pistol, stretched his leg out again. He knew better than to put off anything to do with wounds, so he grasped the arrow and began to push it on through his leg. The pain was severe and caused a cold sweat to break out, but at least the arrow moved. My Lord, Gus, you're shot too, P.I. said. When Augustus bent over to twist the arrow, P noticed that the back of his shirt down low near his belt was caked with blood. The dirt from their digging.
Hell yeah, high life.
But there was no doubt that it was blood. One wound at a time, Augustus said. It took both hands to move the arrow. The skin on his leg began to bulge. Cut, he said to Pete. Pretend I'm snake bit. Pete went white. He hated even looking at wounds. The thought of cutting Gus made him want to be sick, but the fact that he had a sharp knife helped. He barely touched the skin when the cut was made. The bloody tip of the arrow poked through. Gus shoved the tip on out and then fainted. P.I. had to pull the arrow on through. It was as hard as pulling a bolt out of a board, but he got it out. Then he felt deeply frightened. If the Indians came now, they were lost, he felt sure. He cocked his pistol and Gus's and held them both at the ready until his hands grew tired. His head was throbbing. He laid the guns down and wet Gus's forehead from the water bag, hoping Gus would revive. If the Indians came, he would have to shoot quick, and his best shooting had always been done slowly. He liked to take a fine aim. It seemed Gus would never revive. P.I. thought he might be dying, although he could hear him breathing. Finally, Gus opened his eyes. His breathing was ragged, but he reached over and took his pistol back as if he had just awakened from a refreshing nap. Then, to P.I.'s amazement, he crawled out of the cave, hobbled down to the water's edge, and dug in the mud with his knife. He came back with a handful of mud the size of a cannonball. Montana mud, he said. I ain't happy about this wound. Maybe this mud will cool it off. He covered his wound with mud and offered P some. It's free mud, he said. Take some. Then he felt behind him, trying to judge the wound in his back P had drawn attention to. It wasn't a bullet, he concluded. I could feel a bullet. Probably another arrow jiggled out during that run. The twilight was deepening, the creek bed in shadow, though the upper sky was still light. I'll watch west, you watch east, Augustus said. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, a shot hit the cave bank just above their heads, causing dirt to shower down. Augustus looked down the creek and saw two horsemen crossing, too far away to make accurate targets in the dusk. I guess we're fairly surrounded, he said. Some downstream and some upstream. I don't see why we didn't stay in Texas, P.I. said. The Indians was mostly whipped down there. Well, this is just bad luck we're having, Augustus said. We just run into a little bunch of fighters. I imagine they're about as scarce as the buffalo. Reckon we can hold them off till the captain comes and looks for us? He asked. Yes, if I don't get sick from this leg, Augustus said. This leg don't feel right. If it don't heal, you may have to go for help. The thought frightened P.I. badly. Go for help when Gus had just said that they were surrounded? Go and be scalped was what that was an invitation to. I expect they'd catch me if I tried that. Maybe the captain will figure out that we're in trouble and hurry on up here. He won't miss us for another week, Augustus said. I don't fancy squatting here by this creek for a week. A few minutes later, they heard a loud, strange cry from the east. It was an Indian war cry. Another came from the west, and several from the far bank of the river. The evening would be still and peaceful for a few minutes, and then the war cries would start again. P had never approved of the way Indians yelled when they fought. It upset his nerves. This yelling was no exception. Some of the cries were so piercing that he wanted to hold his ears. Augustus, however, listened with appreciation. The war cries continued for an hour. In a lull, Augustus cupped his hands and let out a long, loud cry himself. He kept it up until he ran out of breath. P.I. had never heard Augustus yell like that and hardly knew what to make of it. It sounded exactly like a Comanche war cry. The Indians surrounding them apparently didn't know what to make of it either. When Gus stopped yelling, they did too. I was just thanking them for the concert, Augustus said. Remember that old Comanche that went blind and used to hang around the fort? He taught me that. I doubt they've ever heard Comanche up in these parts. Might spook them a little. Reckon they'll sneak up in the dark? P asked. That was his lifelong worry, being snuck up on in the dark by an Indian. I doubt it. The eyesight of your average Indian is overrated. Spend too much time in them smoky teepees. The bulk of them can't see in the dark no better than we can, if as well. So it's a big chance for them sneaking up on sharpshooters like us. Well, I ain't a sharpshooter, P.I. said. I need to take good aim or else I miss. You're as near depressing as Jasper fans, Augustus said.
Right, the way they say it.
No Indians came in the night, and Augustus was glad of that. He began to feel feverish and was afraid of taking a chill. He had to cover himself with saddle blankets, though he kept his gun hand free and managed to stay awake most of the night, unlike P, who snored beside him, as deeply asleep as if he were in a feather bed. By morning, Augustus had high fever. Though his leg worried him most, he also had a pain in his side. He decided he had been wrong in his first analysis, and that he did have a bullet wound there after all. The fever had him feeling weak. While he was waiting, pistol cocked, to see if the Indians would try and rush them, he heard thunder. Within half an hour, lightning was striking all around him, the thunder crashing. Oh, darn, P.I. said. Now I guess we'll get lightning struck. Go back to sleep. If all you can do is be pessimistic. I smell rain, which is a blessing. Indians mostly don't like to fight in the wet. Only white men are dumb enough just to keep fighting no matter what the weather's like. We fought Indians in the wet, P.I. said. Yes, but it was us that forced it on them, Augustus said. They'd rather do battle on sunny days, which is only sensible. Here, they're probably going to kill us, and you take up for them, P.I. said. He had never understood Gus, never would, even if the Indians didn't kill him. I am an admirer of good sense wherever I find it, Augustus said. I hope you find some today, then, and get us out of this, Pete said. It began to rain in earnest. It rained so hard that it became impossible to see or even talk. A muddy stream began to pour off the bank only inches in front of them. The rain struck so hard it reminded P of driving nails. Usually such freshets were short-lived, but this one wasn't. It seemed to rain for hours, and was still raining when dawn came, though not as hard. Alarmingly to P, the creek had become a river, more than deep enough to swim a horse. It rose so that it was only 2 or 3 yards in from where they were scrunched into the cave, and it soon washed away their crude breastworks. And it was still raining. It was cold, too, though fortunately they had a good overhang and were fairly dry. Gus had dragged the bedrolls in before the rain started. P was shocked to see that Gus didn't look himself. His face was drawn and his hands unsteady. He was chewing on some jerky he had pulled out of a saddlebag, but it seemed he barely had the strength to eat. "Are you poorly?" P asked. "I should have got that arrow out sooner," Augustus said. "This leg's gonna give me problems." He handed P some jerky, and they sat in silence for a while, watching the brown flood sweep past them. "Hell, a frog could have waded this creek yesterday," P said. "Now look at it. It's still raining, too. We may get drowned instead of scalped. It's a good thing Jasper ain't here," he added. "He's mighty afraid of water." "Actually, this flood's an opportunity for you," Augustus said. "If we can last the day, you might swim past them tonight and get away." "Well, but that wouldn't be right," P.I. said. "I wouldn't want to just leave you sitting here." "I won't be sitting. I'll be floating if this keeps up. The good aspect of it is that it might cool off these Indians. They might go back to their families and let us be." "I'd still hate to leave you, even so," P said. "You can't carry me to the herd, and I doubt I can walk it. I'm running such a fever I'm apt to go out of my head any time. You probably have to trot back and bring some of the boys, maybe the wagon. Then I can ride back in style." The thought struck P.I. for the first time that Gus might die. He had no color. He was shaking. It had never been suggested that Gus might die. Of course, he knew any man could die. P himself had seen many die, yet it was a condition he had never associated.
Yeah, I remember about that. They used to do that to the arrows.
They were not normal men, as
That way it
understood
could kill you
normal,
one way or
and he
the
had
other.
never reckoned with the possibility that either of them might die. Now, when he looked at Gus and saw his pallor and his shakes, the thought came into his mind and wouldn't leave. Gus might die. P knew at once he had to do everything possible to prevent it. If he went back to the wagon and reported that Gus was dead, there was no telling what the captain would say. Yet he didn't know exactly what he could do. They had no medicine. It was raining fits. The Indians had them surrounded, and they were 100 miles or more from the Hat Creek outfit. "It's a soggy situation, I admit," Augustus said, as if reading P.I.'s thoughts. "But it ain't fatal yet. I could hold out here for a few days. Call could make it back to this creek in one ride on that feisty mare of his. Best thing for you to do would be just travel at night. If you walk around in the daytime, some of these red boys might spot you, and you'd have about the chance of a rabbit. I guess you could make it to the Yellowstone in 3 nights, though. They ought to be there by then." P.I. dreaded the prospect. He hated night travel, and it would be worse afoot. He began to hope that maybe the rain had discouraged the Indians. That hope only lasted an hour. 3 times during the day, the Indians fired on them. They shot from downriver, and Gus opened up on them at once. They were so respectful of his gun that their bullets only splattered uselessly in the mud, or else hit the water and ricocheted off with a whine. Gus looked so weak and shaky that P.I. wondered if he could still shoot accurately. But the question was answered later in the day when an Indian tried to shoot them from the opposite bank, using a little rain squall as cover. He got off his shot, which hit one of the saddles. Then Gus shot him as he turned to crawl away. The shot caused the Indian to straighten up, and Gus shot him again. The second bullet seemed to suck the Indian backward. He toppled off the bank and rolled into the water. He was not dead. He tried to swim, so Gus shot him again. A minute or two later, he floated past them face down. I expect he would have drowned, P.I. said, thinking it wasteful of Gus to shoot the man 3 times. He might have, or he might have lived to cut off your nuts. There were no more attacks that day, but there was no doubt that the Indians were still there. Before sundown, they raised their war cries again. This time, Augustus didn't answer. The day had never been bright, but it seemed to linger. There was a long, rainy dusk, so long that it made P.I. feel gloomy. It was cramped in the cave. He longed to stretch his legs, and then made the foolish mistake of saying so to Gus. Wait until it's full dark, Augustus said. Then you can stretch it. What if I get lost? P.I. said. I ain't never been in this country. Go south, Augustus said. That's all you have to remember. If you mess up and go north, a polar bear will eat you. Yes, and a grizzly bear might if I go south, P.I. said with some bitterness. Either way, I'd be dead. He regretted that Gus mentioned bears. Bears had been preying on his mind since the Texas bull had had his great fight. It struck him that things were tough up here in the north. It had taken Gus 3 shots to kill a small Indian. How many shots would it take to kill a grizzly bear? Well, you ought to start, P., Augustus said finally. It had been dark for over an hour, and the Indians were silent. That darn water looks cold, P.I. said. I was never one for cold baths. Well, I'm sorry we didn't bring a bathtub, a cook stove, Augustus said. If we had, we could heat some water for you. But as it is, you'll just have to rough it. The rain stopped. The creek could start going down any time, and the more water in it, the better for you. Get out in the middle and pretend you're a muskrat. P.I. was half a mind not to go. He had never disobeyed an order in his life, but this time he was sorely tempted. And it was not just the cold swim and the chancy trek that made him hesitate. It was leaving Gus. Gus was so close to being out of his head. If he went on out of his head, the Indians would have a good chance to get him. He sat for a while, trying to think of some argument that would make Gus let him stay with him. Maybe we could both swim out, he said. I know you're crippled, but you could lean on me once we started walking. Pete, go on, Augustus said. I ain't getting well, and I'm getting sicker. If you want to help, go get Captain Call. Have him lope up here with an extra horse, tote me over to Miles City. P.I. got ready with a heavy heart. It all seemed wrong, and none of it would have happened if they'd just stayed in Texas. Just take your rifle, Augustus said. A pistol won't do you no good if you got to stop one of them bears. Besides, I'll need both pistols. Any fighting that happens here will be close range work. I can't swim holding a darn rifle, Gus, P.I. said. Stick it through your belt and down your pant leg. You can float downstream and you won't actually have to swim much. P.I. took off his boots, his shirt, and made a bundle of them. Then he did as Gus ordered, stuck the rifle through his belt. He stuffed some jerky in one boot for provisions. All he needed to do was leave, but it was hard. Now go on, P., Augustus said. Go get the captain. Don't worry about me. Don't let the Indians catch you, whatever you do. Gus reached out a hand. P.I. realized he was offering a handshake. P.I. shook his hand, feeling terribly sad. Gus, I never thought I'd be leaving you, he said. Well, you are, though, Augustus said. Trod carefully. It was then that the conviction struck P.I. that he would never see Gus alive again. Mainly what they were into was just another Indian fight. and all of those had inconveniences. But Gus had never sustained a wound before that P could remember. The arrows and bullets that had missed him so many times finally found him. After the handshake, Gus treated him as if he were already gone. He didn't offer any messages or say another word. P.I. wanted to say something else, but couldn't think of what. Feeling very disconsolate, he waded into the cold water. It was far colder than he had supposed. His legs at once felt numb. He looked back once and could dimly see the cave, but not Gus. As soon as he reached swimming depth, he forgot Gus and everything else due to a fear of drowning. The icy water pushed him under at once. Floating wasn't as easy as Gus had made it seem. The rifle was a big problem. Stuck in his pant leg, it seemed to weigh like lead. Also, he had no experience in such fast water. Several times he got swept over to the side of the creek and almost got tangled in the underbrush that the rushing water covered. Worse than that, he almost immediately lost the little bundle of boots and pants, shirt, all his provisions, and part of his ammunition. He had reached down with one hand to try and move the rifle a little higher up on his leg, and the water sucked the bundle away and swept it far ahead of him. P.I. began to realize he was going to drown unless he did better than he was doing. The water pushed him under several times. He wanted badly to climb up the bank, but was by no means sure that he was past the Indians. Gus said go down at least a mile, and he wasn't sure he had gone that far. The water had a suck to it that he had constantly to fight against. To his horror, he felt it sucking his pants off. He had been so disconsolate when he walked into the river that he had not buckled his belt tightly. He had nothing much in the way of hips, and the water sucked his pants down past them. The rifle sight was gouging him in the leg. He grabbed the rifle, but then went under. The dragging pants with the rifle in one leg were drowning him. He began to try frantically to get them off, so as to have the free use of his legs. He wanted to cuss Gus for having suggested sticking the rifle in his pants leg. He could never get it out in time to shoot an Indian, if one appeared, and it was causing him terrible aggravation. He fought to the surface again and went under. And when he came up, he wanted to yell for help and then remembered there would be no one around to hear him but Indians. Then his leg was almost jerked off. He had been swept close to the bank, and the dragging gun had caught in some underbrush. The bank was only a few feet away, and he tried to claw over to it, but that didn't work. While he was struggling, the pants came off, and he was swept down the river backwards. One minute he could see the south bank of the river, and the next minute all he could see was water. Twice he opened his mouth to suck in air and sucked in water instead, some of which came back out his nose. His legs and feet were so numb from the cold water they couldn't feel them. He never remembered getting out of the water, but somehow he did. For when he next took note of things, he was laying in the mud, his feet still in the water. He was stark naked and the mud was cold, so he pulled himself up and laboriously climbed the bank. It was only 8 or 10 feet high, but it was slippery. When he got up, he wanted to lay in the grass and go to sleep, but he was awake enough to think about his situation, and thinking soon made him wakeful. He hadn't drowned, but he was naked, unarmed, without food, and something like 100 miles from the Hat Creek wagon. He didn't know the country and was up against some tough Indians who did. Gus was sick, maybe dying somewhere upriver. It would be daylight in a few hours, and the danger from Indians would increase. P.I. at once started walking as fast as he could. Though it had stopped raining, it was still cloudy, and he could not see one star or the moon, or for that matter, anything either on heaven or earth. The awful thought struck him that, rolling around and around in the water, he might have confused north and south and crawled up the wrong bank. He might be walking north, in which case he was as good as dead, but he couldn't stop to worry about it. He had to move. He had lost his pack and his gun in the river, and as soon as the river sank to being a normal stream again, they would all be lying in the creek bed in plain sight. If the Indians found them, they would know he was gone, and that Gus was alone, which would make things hot for Gus. If they were in a tracking mood, it would also make things hot for him. They had horses and could run him down in a matter of hours. The faster he traveled, the better chance he had. After he had thought about it for a while, he was profoundly glad the night was so dark. He wished it could stay dark forever, at least until he pulled inside of the herd. When he thought of all the perils he was exposed to, it was all he could do to keep from running. He remembered vividly all the things Indians did to white men. In his rangering days, he had helped bury several men who had had such things done to them, and memories of those charred, gouged corpses was with him in the darkness. With him, too, and just as terrifying, was the memory of the great orange bear who had nearly ripped the Texas bull wide open. He remembered how fast the bear had gone when they tried to chase it on horseback. If such a bear spotted him, he felt he would probably just lie down and give up. The darkness didn't last. The only blessing the light brought was that P.I. caught a glimpse of the North Star as the clouds were breaking. He knew at least that he was going in the right direction. The sun soon came up, and he remembered Gus's warning not to travel in the daytime. P.I. decided to ignore it. For one thing, he was on an absolutely open plain, where there was no good place to hide. He might as well be moving as sitting. When he looked ahead, he felt very discouraged, for the country seemed endless. It seemed to him he could see almost 100 miles, just empty country, and he had to walk it. He had never been an advocate of walking, and coming up the trail horseback had given him even less affection for it. He had never bargained for doing so much walking, especially barefoot. Before he had gone more than a mile, his feet were cut and sore. The plains looked grassy and smooth, but there were rocks scattered here and there, and he stepped on a good number of them. Also, it embarrassed him that he was naked. Of course, there was no one around to see him, but he could see himself, and it was disconcerting. The captain would be mighty surprised to see him come tramping up naked. The boys would undoubtedly think it hilarious and kid him about it for weeks. At first, the nakedness worried him almost as much as the sore feet, but before he had walked half a day, his feet hurt so much that he had stopped caring whether he was naked or even alive. He had to wade 2 little creeks, and he got into some thorny underbrush in one of them. Soon every step was painful, but he knew he had to keep walking. He would never find the boys. Every time he looked back, he expected to see either Indians or a bear. By evening, he was just stumbling along. He found a good patch of high grass and weeds and lay down to sleep for a while. He woke up bitterly cold to find it was snowing. A squall had blown in. P.I. heard a strange sound and took a minute to realize it was his own chattering teeth. His feet were so sore he could scarcely walk on them, and the snow didn't help. It was a wet snow, melting almost as it fell, but that didn't make it much more comfortable. Somehow he hobbled south all night. The snow soon stopped, but his feet were very cold, and every time he stepped on a rock in the dark, they hurt so he could hardly keep from crying out. He felt very weak and empty and knew he wasn't making very good time. He bitterly regretted not having hung on to some of the jerky, or his rifle, or something. Gus would think him a fine fool if he found out he had lost everything before he even got clear of the creek. In his weariness, he even forgot for a time that Gus had been left in the little cave. Several times he spoke to Gus as he stumbled along, mainly asking directions. For a time he felt Gus was just ahead, leading the way. Or was it Dietz? P.I. felt confused. Whoever it was wouldn't speak to him, and yet he continued to ask questions. He took comfort in thinking Gus or Dietz was there. They were the best scouts. They would lead him in. When the second day dawned, P.I. stopped to rest. He realized no one was with him, unless it was ghosts. But then it might be ghosts. Gus might be dead by then, and Dietz was for sure. Maybe one of them, having nothing to do, had decided to float along ahead of him, guiding him to the Yellowstone. When he looked at his feet, it seemed to him that he might make almost as good time crawling or walking on his hands. His feet were swollen to twice their size, besides being cut here and there. Yet they were the only feet he had, and after dozing for an hour in the sun, he got up and hobbled on. He was very hungry and wished he had paid more attention to hippocampal who could find things to eat just by walking along looking. He tried to look, but he saw nothing but grass and weeds. Fortunately, he struck several small creeks, had plenty of water. Once he even managed to sluice some minnows up on dry land. They wiggled and flopped, were hard to catch, and of course they only made a few bites, but they were better than nothing. His biggest piece of luck came late that day when he was able to knock over a big prairie chicken with a rock. He only broke the bird's wing and had to chase it through the grass a long way, but the bird tired before he did, and he finally caught it, skinned it, and ate it raw. He rested 3 hours and then hobbled on through another night. The third morning, he could barely make himself move. His feet were worse than ever, the plains ahead still endless and empty. His eyes ached from looking so hard for the line of the Yellowstone, but he still couldn't see it. It was the emptiness that discouraged him most. He had almost stopped worrying about Indians and bears. What he had worried about was being lost. He knew by the stars that he was still going south, but south where? Maybe he had veered east of the herd, or west of it, so that no one would spot him. Maybe he had already passed them, in which case there was little hope. The snows would just come and freeze him, or else he would starve. He lay until mid-morning, unable to decide what to do. For a time, he thought the best plan might be just to sit. There were supposed to be soldiers in Montana somewhere. If he sat long enough, maybe some would find him. Finally, though, he got up and stumbled on. The soldiers would only find his bones, if they found anything. It was a blazing day, so hot it made him feel annoyed at Montana weather. What kind of country was it where you could get frostbite one night and sunburn 2 days later? He saw a couple of prairie dogs, wasted an hour trying to get one with a rock, but the prairie dogs were smarter than prairie chickens, and he never came close. He stumbled on, feeling the sun would burn off what skin he had left. Several times during the afternoon he fell. He grew lightheaded and felt as if he were floating. Then his swollen feet would refuse to work, and instead of floating, he would fall. Once he came to, lying flat on his back in the grass, the sun burning into his eyes. He scrambled up and looked around, feeling the herd might have walked right past him when he slept. He tried very hard to walk a straight line south, but his legs were so weak that he kept wobbling off course. "Darn you! Walk straight," he said. The sound of his own cracked voice startled him out of his fury. Then he felt embarrassment. A man who would cuss his own legs just because they were weak was peculiar, he knew. He got the floating feeling again, so strong that he felt frightened. He felt he might be going to float right out of his own body. He wondered if he was dying, if that was how it felt. He had never heard of anyone dying while they were just walking along, but then dying was something he knew little about. He would take a few steps and then feel himself begin to rise out of his own body, which frightened him so that he stumbled and fell. He didn't want to stand up again, and he began to crawl, looking up now and then to see if the herd was in sight. He felt he couldn't live another night so alone and hungry. He would die in the grass like some beaten animal. Then it grew dark, and he wanted to cry with disappointment. He had walked long enough. Surely it was time the boys showed up. Once it was full dark, he stopped and listened. He felt the herd might be close, and if he listened, maybe he would hear the Irishman singing. He heard no singing, but when he got up and tried to stumble on, he felt the presence of his guide again. This time, he knew it was Dietz. He couldn't see him because it was dark, and of course, Dietz was dark, but he lost the floating feeling and walked easier, though he was a little scared. He didn't know what the rules were with people who were dead. He would have liked to say something, but felt he shouldn't. Dietz might go away and leave him to stumble along in the dark if he said anything. Maybe travel was no trouble for the dead. He didn't know. It was considerable trouble for him. He walked slow, for he didn't like to fall, but he walked on all night. 2 hours after sunup the next day, Dish Bogat, who had been sent off to do a little scouting, thought he saw a figure far to the north. At first, he couldn't tell if it was a man or an antelope. If it was a man, it was an easy to imagine, and he raced back to the herd and got the captain, who had been shoeing the mare. Always an arduous task. She hated anyone to handle her feet and had to be securely snubbed before she would submit to it. Fortunately, call was finished, and he rode back with Dish to look for the man. There was no sign of him at first, but Dish had a good eye for country and knew where he had seen him. Call privately supposed it had only been an antelope, but he wanted to check. They had crossed the Yellowstone the day before. The men and all the stock had got across safely. Jasper Fant was in his best mood of the trip, having survived all the rivers after all. "There he is," Dish said suddenly. "If it ain't P." Dish was almost stunned with surprise. P was no longer walking. He was sitting down in the grass, naked, nodding his head as if in conversation with somebody. When he heard them, he looked around, as if not particularly surprised, but when they dismounted, there were tears in his eyes. "Howdy, Captain," P.I. said, embarrassed by his own emotion. "You just missed these, I guess." Call saw that P.I. was wounded out of his head. There was blood on his chest from a shoulder wound. The sun had blotched his body, and his feet were swollen the size of a cow's bladder and cut to shreds. "Is Gus dead?" Call asked, afraid to hear the answer. Though he knew Gus's penchant for trouble, it was a shock to see P.I. in such a state. P.I. had been thinking of Dietz, who had kindly walked him through the night. He was embarrassed to be naked, and he found it hard to turn his mind back to where he could deal with a question the captain had asked him. "The creek's up. It's why I lost my clothes," he said. Call untied his slicker from the saddle and covered P.I. with it. P.I. immediately felt better. He tried to button the slicker so his dingus wouldn't show, but his fingers shook, and Dish Bogat finally did it for him. "Is Gus dead?" Call asked again. P.I. let his mind turn slowly, and he remembered that Gus had been sitting with 2 guns in his hands, not saying a word when he had waded into the river. He had had that bad wound in his leg. "The creek was up when I left him," P.I. said. "I had to swim down past the Indians, and I lost all my gear. Gus kept my pistol." "Where was this?" Call asked. "Up north, Captain," P.I. said. "We dug a cave in a riverbank. That's all I know." "But he wasn't dead when you left him." "No. He sent me off. He said he wanted you to lope on up there and help him with those Indians." Dish Bogat could not adjust to the fact that P.I. was naked and all scarred up. They had had such a peaceful time of it that he had lost the sense that they were in dangerous country. "What was that about Dietz?" he asked. "Help me," P said simply. "Are we going after Gus, Captain? We had a hard time getting one of them arrows out, and his leg was giving him pain." "You're going to the wagon," Call said. "You need some grub. How many Indians were there?" P tried to think. "A bunch jumped us," he said. "About 20, I guess. Gus shot a few. Call and Dish had to lift him. All strength seemed to have left him. Now that he knew he was safe, Dish had to hold him on his horse as they rode back, for P.I. had so little strength he could not grip the saddle horn. The crew, which had been in high spirits and drunk on their own celebrity, for weren't they the first men to bring a Texas herd across the Yellowstone, sobered up immediately when they saw the condition P.I. was in. "Why, hello, boys," P said when he was helped off the horse. They all gathered around to greet him, and Bert and Needle Nelson helped him down. Pocampo had some coffee ready. P reached out for a cup once they had propped him against the wagon. but his hands were too shaky to hold it. Poe fed him a little with a spoon, and between one sip and the next, P slid from his position and passed out. He collapsed so quickly that no one even caught him. "Is he dead?" Newt asked, anxious. "No, he's just tuckered out," Call said. He was filling his saddlebags with ammunition, glad that he had got new shoes on the mare. "He said Dietz helped him," Dish Bogat said. The way P said it had unnerved him. Dietz was dead and buried back on the Powder River. Call didn't answer. He was pondering the question of whether to take a man with him. "I guess he was out of his head," Dish said. "I guess that explains it." Pocampo smiled. "The dead can help us if we let them. And if they want to," he said. Jasper Fant, delighted not to be among the dead, looked at Poe severely. "Ain't none ever helped me except my own pa," he said. "How'd he help you?" Needle asked. "Left me $20 in his will. I bought this saddle with it, and I've been a cowboy ever since." "You call yourself one, you mean?" Soupy Jones said. He had poor relations with Jasper as a result of a dispute over cards. "I'm here, ain't I?" Jasper said. "Just because you lost that hand don't mean I can't cow." "Oh, shut your trap, Jasper," Dish said. He had had enough of Jasper and Soupy and felt the whole question of P and Dietz had been treated too brusquely. After all, the first words P had said was that they had just missed Dietz. Dish didn't want to admit it, but he had been scared of ghosts all his life. He didn't like to think that any were wandering around. It would just make night herding more nerve-wracking, even if the ghost in question was one that might be friendly to him. Then someone noticed that Captain Call was leaving. He took an extra rifle from the wagon and got the slicker that he had lent P, covering P with a blanket. "Just move the stock on north," he said. "Be alert. I'm going to get Gus." The thought of him leaving sent a ripple of apprehension through the camp. Though independent to a man in some respects, the outfit was happier in all respects when Captain Call was around. Or if not the captain, then Gus. Only a few hours earlier, they had felt cocky enough to take on an army. After all, they were the conquerors of the Yellowstone. But now, watching the captain catch a horse for Gus to ride back on, they all felt daunted. The vast plain was beautiful, but it had reduced P.I. to a scarred wreck, and the Indians had Gus holed up somewhere. They might kill him, and the captain too. All men were mortal, and they felt particularly so. 1,000 Indians might come by nightfall. The Indians might fall on them as they had fallen on Custer. Call had no time to soothe the men with elaborate instructions. If Gus was badly wounded, he would weaken rapidly, and every hour counted. Arriving 10 minutes too late would be as bad as 10 days, or a year for that matter. Besides, the almost beseeching way the men looked at him was irritating. Sometimes they acted as if they would forget how to breathe if he or Gus wasn't there to show them. They were all resourceful men. He knew that if they didn't. And yet at certain times they became like children, wanting to be led. All his adult life he had consented to lead, and yet occasionally, when the men seemed particularly dumbstruck, he wondered why he had done it. He and Augustus had discussed the question of leadership many times. "It ain't complicated," Augustus maintained. "Most men doubt their own abilities. You don't. It's no wonder they want to keep you around. It keeps them from having to worry about failure all the time." "They ain't failures, most of them," Call pointed out. "They can do perfectly well for themselves." Augustus chuckled. "You work too hard," he said. "It puts most men to shame. They figure out they can't keep up, and it's just a step or two from that to feeling that they can't do nothing much unless you're around to get them started." "It don't take on me, which is lucky," he added. "I don't care how hard you work or where you go." "I'd like to see something that can put you to shame," Call said. "My pecker's done it a few times," Augustus said. Call wondered what he meant by that, but didn't ask. When he was packed, he mounted at once and rode over to Dish Bogat. "You're in charge," he said. Trail on north. I'll be back when I can. Dish paled at the thought of so much responsibility. He had enough worries as he was, what with P.I. talking of ghosts. The captain looked angry, which made the men better reconciled to the fact that he was leaving. All of them feared his angers, but once he left, before he and the mayor were even out of sight, their mood of relief changed back to one of apprehension. Jasper Fant, so cheerful only an hour before, sank the fastest. "Good Lord," he said. "Here we are in Montana, and there's Indians and bears, and it's winter coming on, and the captain and Gus both off somewhere. I'll be surprised if we don't get massacred." For once, Soupy Jones didn't have a word to say.
Chapter 95.
Augustus kept his pistol cocked all night once P.I. left. He watched the surface of the river closely, for the trick he hoped might work for P could also work for the Indians. They might put a log in the water and float down on him, using the log for cover. He tried to look and listen closely, a task not helped by the fact that he was shaking and feverish. He expected the Indians to come sliding out of the water like big snakes right in front of him, but none came. And as his fever mounted, he began to mumble. From time to time, he was half aware that he was delirious, but there was nothing he could do about it. Anyway, he preferred the delirium to the tedium of waiting for the Indians to attack. One minute he would be trying to watch the black water, the next he would be back at Clara's. At times he saw her face vividly. The dawn broke sunny. Bad as he felt, Augustus still enjoyed seeing the sun. It helped clear his head and stirred him with thoughts of escape. He was sick of the little cold cave under the riverbank. He had thought to wait there for Call, but the more he considered, the more he felt to be a bad plan. Call's arrival was days away, and dependent on P getting through. If P didn't get through, and the chances were good that he wouldn't, then Call might not even start to look for him for another week. As a student of wounds, he knew just by looking at his leg that he was in trouble. The leg was yellowish, with black streaks striping the yellow. Blood poisoning was a possibility. He knew that if he didn't get medical attention within the next few days, his chances were slim. Even waiting for nightfall could be folly. If the Indians caught him in the open, his chances would be equally slim, of course. But it took no deliberation to know that if he had to choose, and he did, he would prefer the active to the passive course. As soon as the sun was well up, he eased out of the cave and stood up. Bad leg throbbed. Even to touch his toes to the ground hurt. The waters were rapidly receding. 50 yards to the east, a game trail led up the creek bank. Augustus decided to use the carbine he had taken off the Indian boy as a crutch. He cut the stirrups off the saddle and lashed one over each end of the rifle, then padded one end of his crude crutch with a piece of saddle leather. He stuffed one pistol under his belt, holstered the other, took his rifle and a pocket full of jerky, and hobbled across along the bank to the animal trail. He edged cautiously out of the riverbed, but saw no Indians. The broad plain was empty for miles. The Indians had left. Augustus wasted no time in speculation. He started at once, hobbling southeast towards Miles City. He hoped he had not more than 30 or 40 miles to go before he struck the town. He was not used to the crutch, and he made poor time. When occasionally he forgot and set his bad foot to the ground, the pain was almost enough to make him pass out. He was weak, and he had to stop every hour or so to rest. In the hot sun, sweat poured out of him, though he felt cold and feared a chill. 2 or 3 miles from where he started, he crossed the tracks of a sizable herd of buffalo. They were probably the reason the Indians had left. With winter coming, buffalo were more important to the warriors than 2 white men, though probably they meant to return and finish off the whites once the hunt was over. All day he persevered, dragging himself along. He stopped less frequently, because he found it hard to get started once he stopped. Rest was seductive, made more so by his tendency to improve the situation through imagination. Maybe the herd had moved north faster than he calculated. Maybe Carl would show up the next day and save him, the painful business of dragging along with his crutch. Yet he hated waiting almost as much as he hated the traveling. His habit had been to go and meet whatever needed to be met, not to wait idly for what might approach. What was approaching now was death, he knew. He had faced it before and overridden its motion with his own. To sit and wait for it gave it too many advantages. He had seen many men die of wounds and had watched the turning of their spirits from active desire to live to indifference. With a bad wound, the moment indifference took over, life began to subside. Few men rose out of it. Most lost all impulse toward activity and ended by offering death at least a half-hearted welcome. Augustus didn't intend to do that, so he struggled on. When he took his rest, he took them standing up, leaning on the crutch. It took less will to get started if one was standing up. He hobbled over the plain through the long afternoon and twilight, finally collapsing sometime in the night. His hand slipped off the crutch, and he felt it falling from him. In stooping to reach for it, he fell face down, unconscious before he hit the ground. In his dreams, he was with Lorena, in the tent on the hot Kansas plains. He longed for her to cool him somehow, touch him with her cool hand, but though she smiled, she didn't cool him. The world had become red, as though the sun had swollen and absorbed it. He felt as if he were lying on the surface of the red sun as it looked at sunset when it sank into the plain. When he got his eyes open, the sun was white, not red, and directly above him, he heard a spitting sound, such as a human would make, and his hand went to the pistol at his belt, thinking the Indians had come. But when he turned his head, it was a white man he saw, a very old, small white man in patched buckskins. The old man had a tobacco-stained beard and a bowie knife in his hand. A spotted horse grazed nearby. The old man was just squatting there, watching. Augustus kept his hand on his gun, but didn't draw it. He didn't know if he had the strength to draw it. "Them was blood Indians," the old man said. "It beats all that they didn't get you. You got enough of them." "5 is all," Augustus said, raising himself to a sitting position. He didn't like to talk laying down. "7, I heard," the old man said. "I get along with the Bloods and the Blackfeet, too. Bought lots of beaver from them in the beavering days." "I'm Augustus McCrae." "You old. Down Miles City, they call me Old Hugh, although I doubt I'm 80 yet." "Was you meaning to stab me with that knife?" Augustus asked. "I'd rather not shoot you unnecessarily." Old Hugh grinned and spat again. "I was about to have a go at cutting off that rotten leg of yours. Before you come to, I was. That leg's ruined. But I might have a hell of a time cutting through the bone without no saw. Besides, you might have woke up and give me trouble." "Expect I would have," Augustus said, looking at the leg. It was no longer black striped, just black. "We got to take it off," Old Hugh said. "If that rot gets in the other leg, you'll lose them both." Augustus knew the old man was right in everything he said. The leg was rotting, but a bowie knife was no instrument for taking it off. "How far is Miles City?" he asked. "I guess they got a sawbones there." "2, last time I went to town," Old Hugh said. "Both drunkards." "You forgot to inform me of the distance." 40 miles, fraction. I don't believe you could have walked it." Augustus used the crutch to pull himself up. "I might fool you," he said, though it was just pride talking. He knew quite well he couldn't have walked it. Just getting to his feet left him nauseous. "Where'd you come from, stranger?" the old man asked. He rose to his feet, but did not exactly straighten up. His back was bent. To Augustus, he seemed scarcely 5 feet tall. "I was setting a deadfall and it fall on me," Old Hugh explained cheerfully. "Some blood warriors found me. They thought it was funny, but my back never did straighten out." "We all have our misfortunes," Augustus said. Could I borrow your horse? Take it. Only don't kick him, old Hugh said. If you kick him, he'll buck. I'll follow along as best I can in case you fall off. He had led the spotted horse over and helped Augustus mount. Augustus thought he might pass out, but managed not to. He looked at old Hugh. You sure you get along with these Indians? He asked. I'd be embarrassed if you came to any trouble on my account. I won't, old Hugh said. They're off stuffing themselves with fresh buffalo meat. I was invited to join them, but I think I'll poke along after you, even though I don't know where you come from. A little far of a town called Lonesome, Augustus said. It's in South Texas on the Rio Grande. Darn, the old man said, clearly impressed by the information. You're a traveling son of a bitch, ain't you? Does this horse have a name? Augustus asked. I might need to speak to him. I've been calling him Custer, old Hugh said. I done a little scouting for the general once. Augustus paused a minute, looking down at the old trapper. I got one more favor to ask you. Tie me on. I ain't got strength enough to mount again if I should fall off. The old man was surprised. I guess you've learned some tricks with all your traveling, he said. He fixed a rawhide loop around Augustus's waist, made it tight to the cantle. Let's go, Custer, Augustus said, giving the horse rein, remembering not to kick him. 5 hours later, as the sun was setting, he nudged the exhausted horse over a slope north of the Yellowstone and saw the little town of Miles City 4 or 5 miles to the east. When he got to town, it was nearly dark. He stopped in front of what appeared to be a saloon, found he could not dismount. Then he remembered he was tied on. He couldn't untie the knots in the rawhide, but managed to draw his pistol and fire in the air. The first shot seemed to go unnoticed, but when he fired twice more, several men came to the door of the saloon and looked at him. Why, that's old Hugh's horse, one man said in a sullen voice, as if he suspected Augustus of horse theft. Yes, Mr. Alt was kind enough to loan him to me, Augustus said, staring down at the man. I've a ruined leg and would appreciate it if someone would locate me a medical man, quick. The men walked out and came around the horse. When they saw the leg, one whistled. What done that? He asked. An arrow, Augustus said. Who are you, sir? The oldest of the men asked more respectfully. Augustus McCraig, captain in the Texas Rangers. One of you gentlemen will need to help me with these knots. They hurried to help, but before they could get him off the horse, red water washed over his eyes again. The spotted horse named Custer didn't like so many men around him. He tried to bite one of them, then bucked twice, throwing Augustus, who had just been untied, into the street. 2 of the men tried to catch the horse, but he easily outran them and raced back out of town.
Chapter 96.
Augustus floated in the red water. Sometimes he saw faces, heard voices, saw more faces. He saw Bolivar and Lippy, his 2 wives, his 3 sisters. He saw men long dead whom he had rangered with. Saw Pedro Flores, P.I., a red-headed whore he had taken up with for a month in his riverboating days. He sloshed helplessly back and forth, as if something were churning the water. When the redness receded and he opened his eyes again, he heard a piano playing in the distance. He was in bed in a small, hot room. Through the open window, he could see the great Montana prairie. Looking around, he noticed a small, fat man dozing in a chair nearby. The man wore a black frock coat sprinkled with dandruff, a bottle of whiskey, and an old bowler hat nearly as disreputable as Lippy sat on a small bureau. The fat man was snoring peacefully. Feeling considerable pain, Augustus looked down and saw
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. Hope everyone has a good night and stay safe.